We're introducing today the Auto Stock for Every Taxpayer Act to require the Treasury to distribute to individual taxpayers all the stock in the new GM and Chrysler within 1 year following the emergence of the new GM from bankruptcy proceedings. This is the best way to get the auto companies out of the hands of Washington bureaucrats and politicians and into the hands of the American people in the marketplace where it belongs. So instead of the Treasury owning 60% of the shares in the new GM and 8% of the shares of Chrysler, you would own them if you were one of about 120 million Americans who paid federal taxes on April 15. This is the fastest way to get the stock out of the hands of Washington and back into the hands of the American people who paid for it. To keep it simple and to help the little guy also get an ownership stake in America's future, Treasury would give each taxpayer an equal number of the available shares. The Treasury Department has said it wants to sell the shares as soon as it can, but the president of General Motors said in a phone call with a number of us in Congress a couple of days ago that this is a very large amount of stock and that an orderly offering of the shares might take several years. These shares might not be worth very much at first, but put them away and one day they might contribute something to a college education. For example, General Motors' 610 million shares were worth only about 75 cents just before bankruptcy, but they were worth $40 a couple of years before that and $75 a few years before that. Already we're beginning to see what government ownership of car companies looks like. Yesterday, the presidents of GM and Chrysler spent 4 hours before congressional committees talking about dealerships. I assume they drove themselves here in congressionally approved methods of transportation, probably their own hybrid cars. That meant they didn't have any time yesterday to design cars, to build cars, or to sell cars. Unless we get the stock out of the hands of Washington, this is going to be repeated over and over and over and over again. There are at least 60 committees and subcommittees in Washington who can summon the heads of the auto companies here to give them advice about how to do their job. Car companies executives who ought to be managing complex companies will be reduced to the status of an assistant secretary, moving from subcommittee to subcommittee, hauling briefing books. You can just imagine what the questions will be next week. What's the next model going to be? What color will the paint be? Which plant should be closed? Why don't you open one in my congressional district? How many cars should have flex fuel? What should the work rules be at the Flint plant? What should the salaries be in the executive offices? Where can conferences be held? Someone will want to know why the GM Volt, is buying a battery made in South Korea instead of in that congressman's congressional districts. There will be lengthy questions about the number of holidays, thousands of written questions demanding thousands of written answers, all of it under oath. So lots of lawyers will need to be involved. And it's not just the Congress that we have to worry about. The president's already called the mayor of Detroit and assured him that he's on his side in keeping the headquarters of GM in Detroit so the executives won't move it to Warren, Michigan. And the mayor of Detroit has said he's had plenty of conversations with members of the president's auto task force who've assured him they're on his side as well. Then there's the Treasury Secretary and then the undersecretaries who want to keep up with what's happening to the taxpayers' $50 billion. There's a very active economic czar in the White House who used to be the president of Harvard. There are the EPA officials who want to be telling them what size cars to build. And it was not very long ago that the administration told General Motors it was building too many SUVs and that its Volt was too expensive to work, and then the president himself fired the president of General Motors. So giving the stock to the taxpayers who actually paid for it is the only way to get the government out of the company's hair and give them a chance to succeed. And it will create an investor fan base of 120 million or so Americans who are now stockholders in those companies, who may be a little more interested in what the next model Chevy might be. Think fan base of the Green Bay Packers, whose ownership is distributed among the people of Green Bay. This is the fastest way to get back to the wise principle If you can find it in the yellow pages, the government ought not to be doing it. More than the money, it's the principle of the thing. The other day, a visiting European automotive executive said to me with a laugh that he had come to the, quote, New American Automotive Center, Washington, D.C. To get our economy moving again, let's get our auto companies out of the hands of Washington politicians and bureaucrats and back into the marketplace and the hands of American investors. The sooner, the better.